Welcome. I think I see folks slowly joining the webinar. And as you come in, feel free to introduce yourself to the group by typing into the chat your name, your LEA, and your role. And perhaps a weekend activity that you're looking forward to. In my case, for example, I'll just share that I am actually moving this weekend. So don't know if that lands quite in the activity I'm looking forward to camp, but it is a weekend activity I'll be engaged in. And for folks just joining, go ahead and feel free to type into the chat. Thank you for getting us started, Ermelinda. Your name, your LEA, your role in the chat box. Thanks, Kathy. Long run, that sounds nice and good healthy thing to do right now. Welcome, Lauren. Love the energy. Friday from Odessa, Texas. And others who've just joined, feel free to hop into the chat, introduce your name, your LEA, and your role, and perhaps a weekend activity that you're looking forward to. Rhonda, spending time with grandbaby, relaxing. Oh, that sounds really lovely. Nice. Kristen, looking forward to some well-deserved rest. Great. And Lisa's going to take a long walk with her dog. That sounds lovely as well. Sounds like some really cozy weekends here. Family movie night with kids. Nice. All right, I think we have even a few more folks in the room now. If you're just joining us, feel free to, again, hop in, introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your LEA, and your role, and perhaps a weekend activity that you're looking forward to. Welcome, Maggie. Family time sounds lovely. We'll give folks just another perhaps 30 seconds or a minute to join and introduce themselves in the chat box. Spending time with my grandson, a pretty big family trend here. I'm seeing family and exercise. Welcome. I'm seeing quite a few more folks in the virtual room, so I think we're ready to get started at this point. So at this point, I think a few of y'all might already be familiar, but my name is Megha Kansra. I am the Director of Resilient Schools Strategy at the TEA, and my role really focuses on helping districts improve remote and hybrid learning this school year. And I've got a teammate, Teresa Spiewak, who is a district support specialist. So a few logistical notes as we get started here. As we go throughout this conversation, feel free to enter your questions and your reactions in the chat box. We do like to kind of have a lively chat going through our conversations. I'll also be pausing at a few different points to gauge your reactions and take your questions. And also, please know we will share slides afterward. One more note on the chat box, I believe, yes, I believe actually we do have two options in this chat box as well. You can chat to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. So pretty much in all cases, we encourage you to just go ahead and actually change that setting to all panelists and attendees so that when you chat things out, when you're introducing yourself or responding to a question, everybody in the virtual room can kind of be part of that conversation. Objectives of the session. So after this session, we're hoping you'll be able to describe the split staffing model, the advantages of split staffing, and some key considerations. Additionally, you'll be able to name action steps in establishing a split staffing model at your district this spring semester. And then you'll be able to hopefully walk away with a little bit of a sense of how real districts are implementing split staffing. So again, we'll be braiding in some case studies of how districts of different sizes have implemented split staffing. Our agenda for today, we will start with a little bit of discussion around why split staffing. Then we will talk about some implementation guidance about how to establish split staffing. We'll have a little bit of group discussion to hear any ahas, next steps folks want to take, and also questions that are surfacing in the room. And then finally, we'll close out. So starting off with the rationale for split staffing. So we've talked about this why before around, why think about alternative staffing models. And really the reason is what we're hearing from our LEAs across the state is that managing remote and on-campus instruction at the same time is challenging and often pretty exhausting for teachers. At the same time, a path to an alternative staffing or scheduling model that would put teachers in a position where they're not doing both modalities at the same time, that path can seem a little complicated and unclear. But ultimately, we all need a strong solution that supports students and families now. So we're really here to elaborate on the solutions that you can put in place pretty soon to support your staff and make make things a little bit less complex for them and simplify their ability to teach in one modality or another. So we've talked about 4 models and 4 approaches to staffing before. So for those of you who were able to join earlier webinars, this might be a little bit familiar, but we do want to just provide this orientation to folks who are coming fresh to this conversation. So on the far left, we've got the concurrent model, which is a model that I think a lot of Texas districts are pursuing right now, where teachers deliver both remote and on-campus instruction in the same class period simultaneously. Then the next panel over, there is a model called split scheduling, where teachers deliver both remote and on-campus instruction, but in separate class periods. So this model requires some master scheduling upfront to just simplify the schedule. So teachers still have to prep for both modalities, but they're at least able to reduce some complexity because they're only teaching one modality in a given class period. Then kind of a model that moves even one step further in reducing complexity for teachers is split staffing, where teachers within one site are staffed to deliver either remote or on-campus instruction, but not both. So this model really provides teachers the opportunity to specialize in one modality and really get strong at either remote or on-campus instruction and kind of reduces that prep load. And then the final model is the virtual academy model. So this is where district-wide you establish one virtual academy that's set up to support all remote learners in the district, and other students attend school on campus. So the virtual academy has an additional benefit on top of the split staffing model that you're actually able to pool your students, your remote teachers across your district, and you're better able to meet needs for virtual learning across your district, particularly if you've got ratios and numbers that aren't necessarily neatly working out at a campus level. So last Wednesday, we held a webinar that focused on virtual academy and how to implement the virtual academy, including a Q&A session with the Lubbock ISD virtual school administrator, Carrie Fulgham. I think folks found that Q&A incredibly valuable and incredibly helpful to just hear from a real district who's implementing this right now. So if you're looking at this screen and thinking, gosh, I really want to learn more about the virtual academy approach, we do recommend checking out our slides, which are posted on our Strong Start page, and we'll share the link to that later in this presentation. But additionally, we will also have a recording up fairly quickly so that you can also just watch that recording and kind of catch up on what happened in that session. But today we are focusing on diving deeper on the split staffing approach in this webinar. So with this focus on split staffing, I'd love to hear what you believe are the benefits of the split staffing approach, and what brings you to this conversation today? What's sparking your interest in split staffing? Feel free to chat in your answers. And again, switch the setting to all panelists and attendees so we can kind of all see your answers. What are the benefits of split staffing in your mind? Nice. Appreciate that, Maggie. Teachers are not overwhelmed, and A similar answer here, Angela, not so hard on teachers. Absolutely. I think that is often the big thing we're hearing from districts that go the split staffing route, that they're really trying to reduce the load for teachers. And just as Adriana here is saying, teachers can focus on one modality. Appreciate that, Adam. It offers teachers a way to play to their strengths. So you can consider strengths when you're assigning teachers, or teachers are perhaps even opting in to either on-campus or remote instruction. Yeah, appreciate that, Christina. We're currently concurrent, but would like to help facilitate split staffing to alleviate teachers being overwhelmed. Absolutely. And we have been hearing from folks who are operating in the concurrent mode, even if they feel that, their concurrent model is actually going fairly well, they often also talk about this problem of teachers needing more prep time or needing a little bit of relief and additional off and planning time, just because the burdens of being able to pull off that model are quite significant on teachers. That's really helpful. So just to summarize, and I think we talked about this in the chat, there are a couple of key benefits to the split staffing approach. On the families and students side, we're looking at potentially stronger remote learning delivery because teachers are specializing in remote. And the flip side, not necessarily listed here, is also stronger on-campus learning. So again, your teacher's attention isn't split between those two groups at one point in time. And there's potentially a greater ability to deliver on families' preferences for remote learning and their expectations of quality remote learning. And then on the teacher side, as we mentioned, you're able to reduce complexity for teachers and increase sustainability for teachers across the district. So let's talk a little bit about how split staffing operates in different districts. In our last webinar on Wednesday, we heard some feedback that we could do a better job of really incorporating some examples from smaller LEAs. So we're going to provide a smaller LEA example and a larger LEA example. And we're starting with the smaller LEA example here. So Hawkins ISD is a district of about just over 700 students in Texas. Hawkins started this school year implementing split staffing at their elementary school. And they really, to make split staffing work, and I think this is the key piece for districts that are smaller, they really had to think about a multi-grade model because they didn't necessarily have multiple teachers teaching the same course in a given grade. So what they ended up doing was creating teacher teams across multiple grades. So for example, grouping grades, the 4th and 5th grades together in one teacher team and designating one teacher the remote teacher for 4th and 5th grade and one teacher the on-campus teacher for 4th and 5th grade. So there were some key enablers to make this happen because a multi-grade model can be tricky to pull off. I think one of the key enablers was that Hawkins ISD actually asked for teacher voice every step of the way. This was truly a teacher-driven model. So teachers opted for going down this path of focusing on either remote or on-campus learning and taking on more grade levels. And ultimately, even when teachers were deciding, okay, which one of us is going to be remote, which one of us is going to be on campus, there was quite a bit of discussion involved. There was quite a bit of conversation about how teachers would team together on course delivery and also help shore up each other's perhaps areas for development in course knowledge. So the key factor for Hawkins being able to really pull this off was that ability to incorporate teacher voice and teacher team in the process. Additionally, Hawkins developed a really clear transition plan to manage roles across teachers, particularly whenever students would switch modality between on-campus and remote. So for example, they were very clear that when a student switched from on-campus to remote at a midpoint in the year, that it would be the remote teacher who's taking attendance, but the instructor record would remain the on-campus teacher. And just having set up some of those key roles in advance helped keep everyone's lanes clean and clear. It helped keep the process clear when some of those transitions started to happen. I think a macro point here is that while split staffing definitely reduces the teacher load, the complexity to manage in split staffing is the fact that when students and families switch over between modalities, there is a little bit of lift in thinking about, well, how do we make that transition as smooth as possible? And I think Hawkins ended up putting a really strong plan in place in that those teachers teaming, knowing the same group of students well, kind of working in lockstep on delivering the course, those action steps really helped smooth the transition for Hawkins teachers. So on the other hand, we're going to share a larger district story from Forney ISD. So this story might be a little bit familiar to folks who attended our introductory webinar on staffing solutions. Now at Forney ISD, they really approached this problem from very much the sentiment that I was hearing in the chat earlier, which was asking themselves, how do they remove the burdens from their staff? And very quickly, the central team came to the conclusion that actually going with a split staffing approach made a lot of sense. Now, across their district of about 12,000 students, Forney felt it was important to put a few central systems in place to really provide some consistency and support across their entire system and across their teachers. So first, Forney put in place a common curriculum, common scope and sequence, right down to common daily formative assessments. So again, when we're talking about kind of that complexity of families and students switching between remote and on-campus modalities, this approach of Forney's really helped ensure that students, from an instructional standpoint, were still moving kind of in a consistent way, even when they moved modality. Additionally, Forney set up a common learning management system with preloaded curriculum. So with all teachers trained in this learning management system, all teachers using this learning management system, this was another kind of key enabler to keep students and families feeling like it was about as seamless as possible switching modalities. Additionally, Forney really points out that proactive family engagement was very important in enabling this model. So Forney, set expectations upfront with their families that when you switch modality, there will be a teacher switch. And so families were expecting this. They were able to kind of manage that change and that tension up front. And additionally, families have been engaged kind of repetitively across the course of this year. So families were introduced to the common learning management system up front, as well as the curriculum. Families have been engaged weekly with technology tips and a parent academy. And all of these different touch points with family have been really key to helping Forney kind of stay ahead of some of these changes. And then finally, Forney also recognized that for those teachers that were exclusively focusing on remote learning, specific PD would need to be targeted toward those teachers to really support them effectively. So they did a good job upfront of parsing, okay, what professional development needs do all of our teachers have versus just our remote teachers or just our on-campus teachers? And they ended up kind of figuring that out in their PD plan upfront. And we're prepared for the year accordingly. So I'll pause there. You've kind of got this food for thought of two different districts of different sizes with a couple of kind of different key enablers that really help them pull off this model with success and with very positive feedback from their teachers. I'd love to hear in the chat, what are some ahas or wonderings that you have as you are hearing about these two different case studies and the approaches of these districts? I'll give it a moment here. Feel free to type in any kind of wonderings or ahas you have as you're kind of taking in what these districts did. Appreciate that reflection. Akila, it was smart to manage parents' expectations ahead of time before the switch. Absolutely. I think every district we've talked to that is, taken one of these alternative staffing approaches has highlighted that as just a very, very key enabler to get ahead of those switches. Appreciate that, Ginny. I like the parent involvement piece. Giving parents an opportunity to troubleshoot and listen to tech tips would be helpful. Absolutely. Yeah, I love this question here, Angela. Concern about teacher of record changing when students are on temporary remote due to quarantine. Yeah, and I thought that the Hawkins solution was kind of a smart one of really kind of keeping that teacher of record consistent, even if you change some of the duties over to the remote teacher. That was a smart way of also just giving a little bit of a sense of peace to families so that families aren't confused or concerned about who their official teacher of record is. And at the same time, they know that there is continuous support for their student when their student switches to remote. Wondering how to transfer from a concurrent model to a split staffing model mid-year. Julia, I feel like you've given me the perfect transition to our next segment, which is talking about some implementation steps that you can take to establish split staffing. So this might look familiar to some of you who attended our virtual academy session, and that is not an accident. The core foundational steps are really very similar between establishing a virtual academy and split staffing. However, with split staffing, you're really focused on campus level changes and support rather than district-wide support necessarily. So the 4 implementation steps at a high level that you'll need to follow are: first, you'll want to build the foundation. So making some key decisions on the structure of your split staffing model across your campuses, and then putting some key enablers in place across your LEA. So, thinking about some of those enablers that Forney and Hawkins put in place, whether it was enabling team teaching and that common team planning time. Second is pivoting with your school communities. So this is kind of that key step that we heard highlighted in both of those case studies of engaging your families and your staff effectively in the transition, and then also assigning teachers to remote versus on-campus roles. Third, you'll want to onboard and launch with really clear roles and expectations across your school communities. And then finally, you're going to want to provide some ongoing support in the split staffing model, particularly when you're getting ready for those transition points where students might be moving between modality. And of course, under each of these 4 implementation steps, there are a few key actions to take. So for example, to build the foundation for your split staffing model, you'll want to make decisions about master scheduling and staffing and the roles of on-campus versus remote teachers. In that second step of pivoting with your school communities, you'll want to take actions at the campus level to proactively communicate with families and students about the coming transitions, while also working on reassigning your staff to those specialized remote or on-campus roles. So we're going to dive deeper into each of these steps, and we'll start with step 1, building the foundation. So the first thing you're going to want to do is really determine which campuses, grades, and courses can you convert to split staffing. Something I'll note here is, as we have talked to districts across the state, universally what we've heard is that it's a lot more feasible to pull off split staffing at lower grade levels. So we've heard success at the elementary level, to some degree, the ability to pull it off at the middle school level. At the high school level, the virtual academy does seem to be a bit more viable because you start to get into more specialized certifications, electives. So it's just a bit trickier to actually split teachers up within a campus in those 2 different roles. You'll also want to think about what student to teacher ratio is feasible on campus versus remotely. And you'll want to kind of take both of your answers to both of these questions to answer a subsequent question of how many staff should be allocated to remote or on-campus learning to meet needs across grades and courses. Now, there are a lot of key inputs to help you answer these questions. So you're going to want to think about the number of families requesting remote learning, the number of certified staff across courses, asynchronous and synchronous time allotments, class size waivers, campus space constraints, and you're also going to want to think about kind of aid and para support. I'll go into, the general process we recommend for thinking about assignment of teachers in a moment, but I also just wanted to offer, and I'm going to drop into the chat here, a link, because often we get a lot of questions about certification assignment flexibility when we're thinking about split staffing in particular, and your ability to be able to split teachers up between those two roles. So I've dropped a link in of the TEA guidance on certification assignment flexibility. And also just want to kind of zoom in on a couple of examples. In that document, there are various different approaches to certification flexibility that are laid out, including the temporary classroom assignment permit, the District of Innovation, flexibility as well. There's additionally a table near the end of the document that I've snapshotted here quickly that kind of depicts some common district concerns around certification assignment. So for example, got a certified 7 to 12 math teacher who I need to teach 2 sections of physics. So this is one example of really looking for that flexibility within your current staffing pool. The option to consider there might be pursuing that temporary classroom assignment permit, or TCAP. And the next steps that you would need to follow to go ahead and pursue that option are kind of listed within this document as well. And there are a couple of additional kind of scenarios listed here. I'm not going to go through each of them, but I do think that document provides just some additional helpful guidance when you're thinking about those certification constraints and where you might have flexibility. And of course, if you've got additional, more detailed kind of follow-up questions on this front, I am happy to answer them. You've got my email address from earlier in the presentation, and I'm happy to share it again. But I know that this is often a tension point when we're thinking about split staffing. So do feel free to follow up with us on this. Now, continuing forward in this kind of first stage and thinking about master scheduling and staffing, we'll follow much the same process as what we discussed with Virtual Academy, only we're just talking about the campus level teachers and students. So you're going to want to pull all students into kind of those 2 groups. You've got your on-campus students, your remote students, and you're going to want to follow the path of first figuring out from an on-campus student support standpoint, based on your target on-campus ratio, so the ratio of teachers to students that you can safely accommodate in your classrooms following your safety social distancing protocol, how many on-campus teachers are required? Based on that, you can back into the number of teachers that you would have available for remote teaching. And then, end up dividing all of your remote students by that number of teachers available for remote teaching, and you're able to come to kind of a remote teacher to student ratio. What we recommend is actually pausing and just reflecting on the ratio that you've calculated there, because if that calculated remote teacher to student ratio is too high, you might want to consider adding aides, paraprofessional support, consider team teaching or co-teaching models that might help teachers just manage the complexity of that larger classroom, or A/B rotating synchronous models. So, do want to note here, we got the advice from Lubbock ISD's Virtual Academy principal earlier this week that at the elementary level, generally in their virtual classrooms, the number of 25 to 35 seems manageable for a class size, but beyond 35 can be challenging to handle when we're thinking about grading, we're thinking about classroom management and instruction generally, and differentiation. So just noting that this is kind of a key point where anticipating some of those hurdles and planning for those virtual class sizes will be key to make sure that you're actually meeting your goal of reducing teacher load. The next piece of building the foundation is setting some pretty clear roles. Being very clear with your remote and on-campus teachers about whether their roles and expectations differ at all. And perhaps they don't fundamentally differ much, but this is a moment to pause and consider that. An interesting aspect of that is where your teachers will work from, your remote teachers in particular. So will they be working from the campus or home? An interesting note here, Forney ISD actually took the approach of having their virtual teachers work from the campus and their virtual teachers hold some roles on campus as well. So they support with things like arrival, dismissal, lunch duty. And this was kind of a way for Forney to think about, well, how do we maintain our safety protocols and provide some very specific roles for our virtual teachers on campus that can be supportive to the broader campus. So just noting that this is a good moment to think about, how you might leverage that virtual teaching pool if it feels safe and feasible for them to be there on campus supporting. The next step in this process is really making sure you've set up your supports for for your remote teachers in particular. So more than likely you have some sense of PD, PLCs, coaching support that needs to go to your on-campus teachers. But we also do recommend that you think kind of like the Forney ISD example about what specific PD, PLCs, et cetera, might be needed for your remote teachers. And also, how are you going to equip your coaches to support your remote teachers? So, will your coaches have a set of virtual learning look-fors, for example, that they can leverage in the classroom? And if you've got questions there, we do have some resources that you all can leverage as well. And then we also recommend really spending some time setting up those key enablers that we discussed. So again, you don't need every single one of these key enablers in place. We don't want you to walk away with the feeling of, oh my goodness, if I don't have a common curriculum, I can't pull off split staffing. That's not true. We do just want to lay out that all of these enablers help you pull off the model. Then there are a few that are particularly helpful. So having a common scope and sequence, common teacher collaboration time, a staff and family engagement plan, particularly for those transitions. Those enablers are especially important and helpful. Other enablers that are helpful are having that common LMS, having that common curriculum. As you've heard in the Forney example, all of these elements can really help make those transitions work smoothly. So I'll pause here and would love to just hear in the chat, which of these enablers do you actually already have in place, and which might you consider putting in place? And I've noticed in my earlier chat questions, folks often responded to just panelists, so feel free to change your settings to all panelists and attendees so we can all see your answers. So which enablers do you have in place, and which might you consider putting in place? Giving folks a moment here. Appreciate that, Christina. Common teacher collaboration time. Yeah, that's a key one. And seeing over there from you, Rhonda, common scope and sequence and common teacher collaboration time. And are those enablers that you've got in place, or ones that you're thinking of putting in place to make split staffing happen? Those are in place. That's great to hear. And I think that's so helpful to know what existing structures you're leveraging before you make this switch. Appreciate that as well, Akila. Common LMS in place already, more support and communication with parents in development. Thanks for that, Erin. Common LMS, common teacher collaboration time, common scope and sequence are all in place. That's great to hear. Nice. Needs staff and family engagement plan. I'm hearing from a couple folks that maybe that next piece is really developing a strong staff and family engagement plan. So you might have some of the the fundamentals on the scope and sequence or LMS side, but staff and family engagement is really perhaps the place to focus. Very helpful. So perfect segue. The second step in the process is communicating with families and students. And this can sound really involved, but I think at a basic level, we really want to make sure families and students are aware of the why, the when, and the how. In terms of the why, it's important to pretty straightforwardly acknowledge that there is a mid-year switch happening, and that we recognize that for some students, teachers might actually shift as a result, but that there is some clear rationale for this switch. So you're looking to provide better remote learning and better on-campus learning for your students and your families. You're looking to deliver on family preferences more effectively, and you're looking to increase teacher sustainability. So I think making that pitch in a very clear and compelling way to your families will be important at this point in time. Additionally, thinking about communicating the when very clearly. So is this transition happening right at the start of the spring semester, at a certain grading period, transition point? Making it very clear so that folks have some time to start getting adjusted to that moment when that switch will happen. And then finally, really laying out the how. So specifically in the split staffing model, this means sharing what steps your principals and teachers will take to pretty thoughtfully transition students. So if there is that switch of teachers happening, how are we going to carefully manage that relationship transfer, the transfer of information about how that student learns well across teachers? So really being clear about the care that your district is taking in the process. And then in terms of assigning teachers to remote or on-campus roles, you might consider a couple of key things. First, you might actually consider teachers running this whole process if that's a possibility in your district. So for example, at Hawkins ISD, there was really agreement across those multi-grade chunks and teams of teachers of who would take that remote role and who would take that on-campus role. And teacher voice really driving the process was key to making that succeed. So that's really something to consider. How do you integrate or even just have teacher voice lead the process? A second thing to consider is really, I think to Adam's point earlier in the chat, which teachers are strongest at delivering remote instruction? So this is a great opportunity to really align assignment with teacher strengths. And at this point in the school year, there's sort of an advantage to maybe even having done this in August, which is you now have a little bit of data to go off of in terms of seeing which teachers are really excelling at engaging their students virtually, at delivering instruction virtually, which teachers enjoy it, or which teachers have an aptitude for it. So consider kind of all of these pieces when you're doing that assignment. And then we come to the onboard and launch phase. There are kind of 3 steps that we recommend taking in order. First, onboarding your school leader or school leaders, then having school leaders really lead that teacher onboarding piece, and then having teachers and school leaders work together to onboard your families and students. And in this first piece of school leader onboarding, really consider making it clear how school leaders are supporting your remote versus on-campus teachers as coaches, what the plans are for managing those transitions of students between modalities and teachers. And then finally, make sure that school leaders leave this onboarding prepared to lead that teacher onboarding to split staffing. When you get to that teacher onboarding stage, there are a few things to consider. So you'll want to be ready with student assignments and any relevant student data to really facilitate that transition of students from one teacher to another where that might be happening. You'll want to be clear about any new central systems you're putting in place. So if you're in the boat of establishing a common LMS, for example, giving teachers a clear introduction to that LMS will be key. Making clear any key scope and sequence or curriculum shifts. For your remote teachers, if you are doubling down on remote specific coaching, providing any look-fors or expectations of what their remote classroom should look like would be really helpful at this stage. And right along with that, providing clarity on coaching and support structures. So for example, will there be PLCs? Will the PLCs be specific to remote or on-campus learning? Or will there be some teaming structures that really help both on-campus and remote learning teachers kind of work together and move in lockstep on content? And then finally, you'll want to make clear the action items that teachers need to keep in mind to be ready for split staffing on day one. And then the family and student onboarding piece, and again, you'll want your school leaders and your teachers on board, really helping families get oriented to this whole process and this new system. You'll want to be ready with your teacher assignments, your schedules, and your rationale for the switch. If you're introducing new central systems, again, you're going to want to introduce families to those, and then set very clear expectations for those transitions to and from on-campus learning. So how to request a transition, making it clear that teacher switches will happen. And then finally, kind of making sure that message comes through that teachers will transition student relationships with care, and describing exactly how teachers will do that. The final piece of the process is thinking about ongoing support. And I want to note that you can accomplish those first 3 steps, launch, and then start to consider ongoing support. I recognize there's a lot going on at this point in the school year, and for folks who are looking to make the switch to split staffing in the spring, you might need to just get the basic building blocks in those first 3 steps in place, and you can pick up this 4th step once split staffing is running. So in terms of ongoing support, we recommend you think about 3 big buckets. First, how you're supporting your remote teachers in particular. Second, progress monitoring. And third, those transitions to and from on-campus learning. And a few different ways to think about ongoing support, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. You would want to consider, how are you doing that, the remote teacher support? Are you conducting virtual walkthroughs and action coaching that are very specific to remote teachers? Is the campus leadership reflecting on data regularly? Really making sure you're continuing to gauge family, student, and teacher input on how the split staffing model is working. So perhaps having a clear survey cadence to do that. And then finally, also being clear on, if you need to switch to 100% remote, what does that transition plan look like? And what does everyone need to do to enact that plan? So these are just a few considerations as you're thinking about ongoing support. I'll just pause here and would love to ask just a quick chat question. What are some other, ways to provide ongoing support in this model that are coming to mind for you as you're thinking about the Forney, the Hawkins example, and just everything we've talked about so far, or perhaps based on just some planning you're doing at your own district? What are some additional ways to provide ongoing support? Giving folks a moment to type in answers here. And not seeing answers right now, I'm gonna conclude that I was rather comprehensive here. Oh, good. Okay, there we go. I think hearing from Rhonda, I believe there needs to be specific admin assigned to virtual learning and face-to-face learning. Love that thought. We talked about on Wednesday's webinar how Lubbock ISD actually had a virtual academy principal across their district. And a similar concept at the campus level is really splitting up your admin in those specialized roles. I love that idea, Rhonda, to also have your admin specialize in thinking about one modality or another and getting really strong at coaching in one or the other. Appreciate that. All right. So I'm going to open it up for just a little bit of group discussion and chatting. Um, Curious to hear, what steps can you take in the next 1 to 2 weeks to establish split staffing at your LEA? And again, feel free to change your setting to all panelists and attendees. I do like this note here, Christina, in response to the last question: flexibility, patience, and grace. Absolutely. Whenever you're making a switch, making sure we're approaching it from that mindset of flexibility, patience, and grace. And I think we started to get to some of the answers on this question earlier when folks said that the family engagement plan is really kind of the next piece to work on. And I'm seeing here from you, Christina, as well, meetings and discussions with teachers, those on the front lines. Absolutely, that feels essential. And we've heard that across the models that we've seen have success in reducing teacher load. Those upfront discussions with teachers, teacher input has been key. Others on steps that you're going to take in the next 1 to 2 weeks, or questions that you actually need to get answered to inform your actions. Whether you're at a stage where you're deciding whether or not to pursue split staffing, or perhaps you've decided you're walking down this path, but you're having some questions on the implementation front. Appreciate that additional note here, setting clear expectations in the next 1 to 2 weeks. That feels really key, especially, in a year where there's a lot of change, making sure, if we're making one more change, how do we make the expectations very clear? Yeah, appreciate that question, Akila. Are there any recommendations from TEA regarding teacher to student ratio in remote learning? I think what we've heard from the field, I think at least, the Lubbock ISD example is one that I mentioned earlier of just, at the elementary level, for example, above 35 students in the virtual setting for one teacher can start to get really challenging to manage. And so you might want to have that additional aid or para support at that point in time. So that's kind of one guidepost. And then you can kind of adjust for the secondary levels. And we'll continue gathering more information on just, what's really working on the ground in terms of teacher to student ratio on remote learning. But I really appreciate that question, Akila. Other questions or action steps that you're looking to take in the next 1 to 2 weeks? We'll give it another moment here. Also realize that it is a Friday afternoon, so completely understand if you're kind of just taking the information in today. Seeing a note here in the chat, informing parents and families as the next step. Absolutely, I think that's the common thread we're seeing across a lot of LEAs. That feels like the next step, really clear communication. All right, well, with that, we are gonna wrap up. So the next and final piece of our staffing series is focused on that last approach that we talked about that's an alternative to concurrent instruction, which is split scheduling. So splitting your teachers up across modalities so that they are either teaching remote or on campus in a given class period. And we're hosting a short webinar just to talk through master scheduling approaches on Thursday, December 3rd to enable split scheduling. If you want to access any of our prior webinar material or sign up for this webinar, you can do so on our Strong Start page, and the link is here, and we'll also share the slides soon afterward. I'm also curious, we are hosting this set of webinars, but we want to keep posting additional resources that could be helpful to you. Please feel free to throw into the chat any additional support needs that you have as you consider or transition to a split staffing approach. I think what I heard from folks was that family engagement being kind of that next step probably means that seeing some examples of family communication could be helpful, but feel free to chat in if you might have other needs. So for example, sample schedules, sample plans from districts who have done split staffing. And we'll take that into account and post some additional resources that we can find. Love that. Sample schedules would be great. Perfect. Okay, we will definitely look for those and see if we can get some good resources posted. And keep those ideas coming as folks are thinking. I also wanted to offer, a lot of you on this call are also thinking about this general question of how do we make virtual instruction stronger at our LEAs? We are running a virtual instruction strategies series right now, and it has 4 parts. 2 segments have already been done, one on student engagement, one on concurrent instruction. We've heard great feedback from LEAs that have participated that these have been very useful. So we are providing just the recordings and the slides from these sessions to all LEAs, and I'm just going to drop the link to those in the chat here. Please do feel free to check out those resources, but also use them in a turnkey manner. They are meant to be picked up by districts and implemented with your schools, with your teachers. So do feel free to run with those. We've got 2 additional sessions coming up in December on checks for understanding and differentiation. And if you've got additional questions on this front, do feel free to reach out to me as well. And then a final ask here, I think we've done quite a bit of chatting as we've gone on your ahas and questions. So my final ask for you will just be to fill out our very short survey that I'm dropping into the chat here. I think this should only take about a minute, but we really appreciate your feedback, especially as we just work to make sure we're pulling together the resources you need. We are planning potentially another series of these webinars. And so if there are any tips on how to make these stronger and to meet the needs that you all are encountering right now, we'd love to hear that feedback. And with that, I am going to conclude and just wish you all hopefully a little bit of rest over the next week. And please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I will, let me actually put my email address back up here. So both I and my teammate Teresa are available if you start to run into more specific questions around staffing, or you're looking for resources or looking to learn from specific districts. We are here to help you kind of pull off these transitions. So thank you so much. Really appreciate all of you joining, and take care.